Welcome to the Hermetic Astrology Podcast. I'm Gary Caton in Waynesville, North Carolina. You can find me on the web at dreamastrologer.com. And today is Friday, Freya's Day, Venus Day, April 24th, 2020. And it's a wonderful time to share with you some incredible features of the astronomical side of Venus. She's now approaching her greatest brilliance in the western sky, shining incredibly bright, bright enough to cast shadows on regular ground. Not to mention if you catch the reflection in a lake or something. It's absolutely no mystery why she is known as the goddess of beauty. And also harmony. And that's a very interesting thing, because when you begin to understand the astronomy of Venus, it is absolutely remarkable. The Earth and Venus are like brother, sister, sibling, sister, sister, brother, brother, whatever you want. We don't necessarily have to genderize it, but they are very much like siblings. And in the sense that they are locked into a harmony that is absolutely like clockwork. You can count on Venus. And in fact, the Mayans very much did so. Venus was very much an integral part of their calendar. So I'm going to show you a little bit more about that. Let's see here. Awesome. So this is a diagram from a book that I was part of. It's called Astrology, the Next Generation. My friend Vanessa Keys, I sent her a sketch, and she was a graphic artist. In fact, she's the same person who sent me this bust of Hermes. God bless her soul. What's really fascinating about Venus is you'll notice that this is a heliocentric view of the Venus journey. You'll notice that these events of greatest elongation, which is the furthest Venus gets from the sun in the sky, which is approximately 47, 48 degrees. That happened a month ago. We're already past that. Then we have greatest brilliance, which is her brightest shining, which is happening now. And then we have the conjunction with the sun. And then we have, on the other side, in the morning sky, we have greatest brilliance about 35 days later, 5 weeks. And then 5 weeks later, we have greatest elongation as morning star. All of these things are perfectly in symmetry. And so it's amazing to me, for instance, how some people will be saying right now, Venus is in the shadow of the retrograde. And I'm like, shadow? What shadow? Like, God, have you seen her lately? Yes, it's true that she's in a region that she will visit 3 times. And it's very interesting how these 3 meetings, as different as they are, greatest brilliance as evening star, conjunction with the sun and invisibility, and greatest brilliance as morning star, they all occur in the same degrees of the zodiac, which is absolutely fascinating to me. So there's this wonderful symmetry. And if we look at that from a more human perspective, side on, looking at the horizon, this horizontal line here would be the horizon, right? So first of all, there's a wonderful symmetry in the entire visual cycle, where Venus makes 7 conjunctions with a waning moon as she's getting lower and dimmer. Then she disappears for about 60 days. Then she gets higher and brighter while she's making 7 conjunctions with a waxing moon. And this alone, I remember the first time that my buddy Adam Gainsbourg shared that with me, I was like, you're kidding. Like you couldn't possibly design a more incredible symmetry and harmony, you couldn't do it if you tried, and there it is, just naturally right there. Um, and if you want to find out more about that entire thing, I recommend Tammy Bronk and Kaylin Castell of the. They have a thing they do called Venus Alchemy together. They're both from the Shamanic Astrology School, and they do a wonderful job taking people ceremonially through that entire journey. It's a journey of initiation into the heart space of into the sacred heart space. And so here we are now over here at greatest brilliance as evening star. So Venus is out for hours after dusk, shining incredibly bright, shining way brighter than the brightest star in the sky. In fact, she's part of, I'll show you here in a minute, she's part of a big group of stars known as the Sacred Hoop. Astronomers call it the winter hexagon. I'll show you more about that in a minute. And then she's going to turn retrograde pretty soon, disappear, go through about 14 days of invisibility as she's passing between the sun and the earth, makes this invisible union with the sun at the same place in the zodiac she is now, either zodiac, by the way, and then rises, becomes very quickly, reaches greatest brilliance as morning star, and that happens in the same place once again. It's incredible. There's this beautiful symmetry, amazing in every way, like throughout the entire thing. It's all just beautifully harmonized. And so, as I say, no wonder she's known as the goddess of beauty and harmony, right? It's right there in front of our noses if we care to look. So I want to show you, if you are able to get out in the sky, she's also going to be joined by the moon over the next 3 evenings. Unfortunately, the forecast for my local forecast here in Western North Carolina is pretty bleak. So I made the journey, I made the pilgrimage up to the Blue Ridge Parkway the other night, and it's actually closed. My local section is, so I had to park the truck at where the road crosses the parkway, and there was one other truck or vehicle on the other side, so I'm assuming they went the other way, and I had to hike and bike 2 or 3 miles in the opposite direction. So at that point I was about as social distanced as you can get. There was one other human within about 5 miles of me at that time. And it's my favorite part of the parkway because it's incredibly dark. Yeah, it's about as dark as it gets on the East Coast. There's a few places that are darker, but not that many. And you can see here, Venus is shining very bright, very high above the horizon. There's a red star nearby known as Aldebaran. That's the eye of the bull. You can see the shoulder of the bull here. That's the Pleiades, the seven sisters. And then the horns of the bull here with Alnath and Alheka, right? And then if you draw a line from Aldebaran over to the next, actually the brightest star in the sky, it goes right through the belt of Orion over here to Sirius. And if you follow Aldebaran down to the next brightest star, it's Regal. And that's in the legs of the great giant Orion. Then up to Sirius, up to Procyon, over to Pollux, down to Capella, and back to Aldebaran. That's the sacred hoop, also known as the winter hexagon because it's shining high overhead in the winter time. And you can see here, if we draw this line from Aldebaran to Capella, Venus is inside the sacred hoop. So she's making this incredible brightness, reaching this maximum brilliance inside this ring of stars, the incredibly bright stars, all of these stars are first magnitude stars. You know, and she is just blasting them all out of there's no comparison. It's amazing. And then tonight you'll see just inside the constellation boundaries of Taurus, we have also the moon here is applying to a conjunction with the Pleiades. Now, notice that this pink line is the ecliptic plane. And by the way, you might be able to see, if you're in a dark enough place, and a really incredible phenomenon. I witnessed it the other night, and I got a little bit of it in my, first of all, the Milky Way travels across horizontally right through the solstice point here. So you can see a band of stars there if it's dark enough, this going this way. And then there's a cone of light that reaches along the ecliptic. It's basically dust that is trapped inside the Earth's orbit, and the dust reflects light. And it shows up as this cone of light along the horizon well after it's full dark. But there's this cone of light, almost as if, you know, there were a town or something over there that was shining really brightly, but it's not light pollution. It's, well, I suppose in a sense it is, but it's a cosmic kind of light pollution, in that it's dust particles reflecting sunlight. And so there's this cone of zodiacal light that I witnessed the other night, and that was really beautiful. And so we have the moon joining Venus over the next 3 nights, and tonight she'll be quite a bit lower, and then tomorrow night she'll be right there conjunct Aldebaran. And you'll notice that still on the left-hand side of this pink line, the ecliptic plane, whereas Venus is very much on the opposite side of that line. And in fact, you'll notice that Venus is a good bit off of that line. And if we come over here to the solstice point at 0 Cancer, that is, the blue line is the ecliptic. The blue line is the belt line of the Earth, the equator, projected out into space. And the difference between the equator, which, you know, is the daily rotation of the Earth, versus the annual revolution of the Earth around the sun, the difference in those circles is about 23 degrees, 26 minutes currently. It does vary over extremely long periods of time, and that's part of 3 cycles that are known as Milankovitch cycles. When together they reach a maximum or minimum, it affects the Ice Age cycle. In any event, that maximum distance between the equator and the ecliptic, 23 degrees, 26 minutes, that's the farthest the sun reaches, right? The sun reaches that distance and hovers there at maximum declination for 3 days at the solstice. Venus is well past that. In fact, let me just check here, this wonderful program that I have here. It's called Starlight, Bernadette Brady. I got this from her, I think, in 2008 at the UAC in 2008. Let's see. Latitude is almost 5 degrees north, so her declination is 27.5, right? And we said 23.5 is the bounds of the sun. So she's literally 4 degrees. Now, this is a very interesting situation, because it brings Venus very close to the Pleiades earlier this month. As you can see, the Pleiades are in north latitude, and so is the star Elnath. Pollux, Castor and Pollux are on the north side of the ecliptic. And so Venus is making this journey through this part of the sky where the sun never goes. And in fact, really, the moon goes through this part about every 18 years as she reaches her furthest, which is 5 degrees. Very seldom do any planets go through this region of the sky. And so Venus is traveling along through a region that is very unusual. and here we, and here we are. And I think that it's interesting, um, this out of bounds, because in the classical canon, an out of bounds planet. Well, the sun is the planet that determines the bounds. The sun is the king or queen, the sovereign in their worldview, right? Um, and so a planet that's outside of that, well, they must be a rogue or a maverick, Robin Hood, for instance, living in the Sherwood Forest, or they might be a special envoy, like Lewis and Clark, were sent by the president to explore this new Louisiana Purchase, and find out what the hell is out there, anyways. Um, so there's this. So Venus is either some kind of rogue or maverick, or this special envoy going through this uncharted territory. And maybe both, depending on who you ask, right? And so we'll see the moon tomorrow night with Aldebaran, and then one more night we'll see the moon there. And notice that when the moon's with Aldebaran, just shy, if we draw this line from Aldebaran over to Capella, not quite, the moon's not quite in the sacred hoop there with Venus, but on Sunday night, the 26th, the moon will be well inside the sacred hoop there with Venus, and they'll be roughly on the same level vis-a-vis the horizon. That's called altitude. It should be quite a gorgeous sight to see. I'm kind of bummed that and it would be tempting, honestly, if the situation were different, to cross state lines and find a little bit better, clearer spot, if possible. But I don't think I'm gonna mess with the powers that be at this point in time. I'm old and wise enough to to not bother with that when I don't really have to. I got out to see the show the other night, and that's going to have to be good enough. But if you are fortunate enough to have clear skies, you really ought to get out and see this, because it's quite an unusual, quite a beautiful. And you'll notice that now, see how now the moon is coming, just beginning to graze the ecliptic, which is interesting because she was south. She's now coming closer. She's going to cross the ecliptic where? Well, if we do one more day, there's the moon dead on the ecliptic plane right at the solstice point. This is interesting because that is essentially the location of Rahu, the north node of the moon. This is the place where the moon crosses the ecliptic in an upward fashion. And we're going to have an eclipse there. And we had an eclipse at the winter solstice point in December, and we're going to have an eclipse at the summer solstice point in later on in the year. And these are always world-shaking events. When 9/11, right? We had and this, so far, 9/11 ain't got nothing on what we're going through now. So there you go. But I think it's really something to focus on, this beauty and this harmony, as a way, sort of a way of, in fact, this whole idea, I remember, it's really interesting, because I saw my wonderful, beloved friend Shireen Shostak posting about the origins of the word quarantine. And it literally means a 40-day reprieve from the world, right? You're in timeout for 40 days because we don't know where you're coming from exactly, and we want to see, like, so they would literally be put. Now this is really interesting because in alchemy, that's what you take, this thing and you put it in a vessel and you isolate it. 40 days is known as an alchemical month. And inside that vessel, things can happen, transformations can happen, but it's in a safe, enclosed space. And I think that by invoking Venus and tuning into the harmony and beauty of Venus, we can actually give ourselves a sacred space within which to be quarantined, It's a very different experience when you're quarantined inside a temenos, inside a vessel, a sacred space. And this is what Shireen is so good at. She's been doing these Project 40, these 40 days journeys, guided journeys with people for years and years. And it's incredible what can happen. But you have to have that sacredness surrounding you in order for the process of quarantine to be truly truly productive, you see. And so I thought I would share this with you. If we look at it from point of view of a chart wheel, and this is using the sidereal zodiac. Now, it's important to point out here, the sidereal zodiac and what I just showed you, the constellations, not the same. The sidereal zodiac is much more aligned with the constellations generally. Most, as I understand it, I'm not a sidereal astrologer, but as I understand it, many of the Ayanamshas are actually aligned with the star Spica, which they call Chitra. And so, you know, it's based on the stars, but it's still 30-degree divisions. So the boundary of 0 Taurus sidereally is not necessarily going to be right there where the bull's shoulders meet the legs, right? It's going to be in the neighborhood for sure, much more in the neighborhood than tropical for sure. But you'll see here's the moon tonight applying to the Pleiades, and then tomorrow night applying to Aldebaran, and then the next night applying to Alnath. So it's really interesting how these three stars at three different points in the beginning, the middle, and the end of Taurus are all being, and this is essentially, by the way, the formula for constellational talismans. If you want to invoke the energy of Taurus, it's really interesting. You know, I was given my special presentation for the Astrology Hub crew the other night, and the host, Amanda, was saying how she was saying that she appreciated my tone was kind of smooth and even and relaxed, and it made people feel like relaxed and stuff. And that's a very Taurian attribute, right? Calm, serene, you know. And so if you want to invoke that presence of Taurus, peaceful, serene, you know, nature loving, simplicity. We also talked about, you know, how I think that the virtues of Taoism, the three treasures of the Tao, are very much Taurian attributes. If you want to invoke those, this would be a wonderful time to do a talisman. You could draw a figure of the constellation of Taurus and put the moon and Venus in there, and say some prayers and burn some incense and pass the drawing through the smoke, and bing, bang, boom, you've got a Taurus constellational talisman. The moon needs to be in the constellation and applying to one of the stars of that constellation. And that's essentially the very simple formula. I was planning on doing one of these with folks on the other side of the morning star, when Venus and when the moon and Venus match up at her morning greatest brightness for Sky Astrology Conference, but alas, we got canceled along with pretty much everything else in the world, and so not going to be able to do that live with people. But you know, it might, maybe there'll be clear skies and I can do something. It'll be clear skies and a little more freedom of movement by then. I'll show you those three charts here in a minute. But I just wanted to show people like a more chart wheel based view for those who are, you know, that's their, this is, again, this is a sidereal zodiac. Not the same as the constellations, but much more closely based on the constellations. And if we just look at those three charts, and again, these charts are sidereal. Bear with me 1 second while I find them here. Usually I have this stuff pulled up, but I guess I forgot to pull this one up. And by the way, if you're listening in on the audio, you can find these visuals on the YouTube channel. Just search my name, Gary P. Caden, in YouTube, and you'll find it. So here we go. Taurus constellation. So this is basically the chart you just looked at that I'm pulling up now. And I did it for tomorrow evening because the position of the moon tomorrow evening will be near Aldebaran, and that's where the conjunction with the sun is going to happen, as we'll see here in a minute. It might have been easier just to do it in the program. Okay, here we go. So here's the situation tomorrow night. The moon conjunct Aldebaran, applying to a conjunction with Venus, who is in turn applying to Alnath, right? And then if we look at the conjunction of Venus with the sun, it happens at around 20 degrees of Taurus sidereally, which is very close to the star Alnath, and that's on June 3rd. So we have April 25th, greatest brilliance, evening sky, conjunct the moon. June 3rd, invisible conjunction with the sun, closest to Earth. Venus is passing between the sun and the Earth. Won't be visible actually crossing the solar disk this time around, but pretty much the same place where she was in 2012 and 2004 when she did, but just slightly off the disk, so we won't see her cross the sun. So June 3rd, April 25th, June 3rd, and then July 17th is the other date. And so we can begin to understand these as a three-part series. They are related. Here again, you can see Venus and the moon well conjunct just on the other side of Aldebaran on July 17th as greatest brilliance, as morning star. And so this brings us back to that formula that I discovered way back when, which is the basic alchemical formula for transformation. And that is Nigredo, Albedo, Rubedo. Yeah? Blackening, whitening, and reddening. And so the first thing that needs to happen when something transforms is it needs to break apart. It needs to abandon the old form, and it needs to become black. And in fact, the alchemists would say, when the matter becomes black, rejoice, for this is the beginning of the work. So if we go back to the this is where we are now. This is the blackening. And you know, it's not hard actually to see that you know, parallel. I was meeting with a few friends specifically in the Venusian domain, right? Because you know, social distancing is tough, right? Think about this for a second. In terms of the classic qualities: hot, cold, moist, and dry. Distance is dry. When you say, you know, talk to the hand, right? Like, move away, please. That's it's cold, number one, because it's right, and it's dry. What planet is cold and dry? Saturn, right? Distancing, boundary, so that it hurts to say to, especially to people that you care about, please, you know, keep your distance. And it's interesting because two out of the at least a couple of the people that were that I was sharing with last night, they were experiencing, you know, very acutely those feelings of separation and isolation, and yet we had this sacred container of friendship within which to talk about those feelings, and they went away feeling much better. and then at least they could talk about it with people who understood them and so there's this, that's what the process is, allowing something to break down and to, because only by allowing it to become black, and break down can it be transformed into something new, you see. But you need this sacred container within which to do that. And then the conjunction with the sun on June 3rd will represent the albedo, right? The light. This is the sun is the brilliant light that lights our world, and indeed is the source of the brilliant light that Venus is shining right now. So this is Venus in union. There's this union. There's this coming together with the source of the light of, and this represents a process where before, as I said, Venus was lit up by the sun, by an external light. In this instance, this is where we find the light within ourselves. In the deepest darkness, we find the light that is within. And that it just often just a glimpse, just the briefest glimpse of light. Like, and yet that brief glimpse is a glimpse of the future. It's a glimpse of a new self emerging from you know, I've been going through a lot over the last few months, and I'm reminded of something I share with people when with other people when they're going through stuff. And it's a passage from Rilke. In his letters to the young poet, he talks about how that trusting the grieving process, right? That it's a sacred process of transformation. And he says that the future enters us when we're grieving. And this is the same thing that the alchemists are talking about. Trust the blackening process, because it's through that the future enters you. And Rilke says that there's this strange presence that enters our lives before we even realize it. And it's only later when it arrives fully manifest in the world. And this is very much something that you see explicitly talked about in the Tao, but I don't know how many. It says very explicitly that the incorporeal, the spiritual, is the source of the corporeal, that things exist as a spiritual vibration before we see them manifested. They exist as an idea, right? If you're a creative person, the idea for my book came to me long before the book was ever real, right? Same concept, but deeper. And this is the time when that spiritual light is just becoming manifest, right? It's just like it reaches the consciousness, and there's a whitening, there's a light, and now, not the end of the darkness necessarily. This is like the middle of the darkness. Maybe some darkening, and you might, oh God, did I really see that light? Did I, you know, it's there. Trust it. You saw it. It's there, and it will grow. Might be a while before you see it manifest. And in fact, that conjunction doesn't happen until July, where Venus becomes, sorry, I'm going the wrong way there, where Venus becomes, oops, no, I was going the right way. That's something else entirely. That's a supermoon over DC. This is, here we go, July 17th. This is the moon and Venus conjunct near Aldebaran with in the morning sky. Mornings equal new beginnings, right? So this is the rubedo. This is the reddening. This is I let this one form go. I allowed it to dissolve and disintegrate, and that was sad and hard, but I trusted the process, and I encountered this vision of the future, of something new, this light within me, and I trusted that, and it grew, and now it's becoming manifest in the world, and now it's time to build on that, to to feed it, to nurture it, to act on it, to bring it out into the world and to let it grow. And this is a universal process. And it's really fascinating to me how the planets, in their cycles, are constantly giving us these. Every 8 years Venus does this process in 5 different signs, right? So there's 5 different areas, and this one, tropically, of course, this is the sign of Gemini, the twins. And it's very interesting to me how, and you'll notice that this is happening in a square to the planet Neptune. So Neptune right now is square to the nodes of Venus. And this is very fascinating to me. This is something that I wrote about in my article for Astrology.com, where I wrote about the Venus retrograde. I'll share that on Facebook here after I get off, so that people can take a look at that. But this idea that, because back in the 60s, remember 52 years ago, I talked about this in another episode. 52 is a very important cycle in Mayan astrology. It's known as the new fire cycle, where they would put out all the, I'm going to go ahead and take this down. I don't think we need that anymore. They would put out all of the fires in the entire city, in the entire kingdom or empire, I guess, and they would go to a high place, and they would light a new fire, and then they would bring that down to the various temples, and then the various households would light their fire from that. It's very similar to the Vestal rituals of the Vestal virgins. They were the keepers of the sacred fire for the Greeks. And this was this was very specifically a renewal of a social order. They thought that if they didn't do this, they didn't purify their kingdom this way, that the forces of darkness would come along and take over. And so it's very interesting to me that if we look at the history of 52 years ago, in the beginning of the year, it was a really tough time. MLK was assassinated, and across the entire world there were massive protests. And if you just look up, May 1968 in France, for instance, was a huge, and all over Eastern Europe there was a lot of unrest in that spring of 68. But then later there was this coming together of consciousness in the event of Woodstock in the U.S. And so I feel like that was like, the Nigredo was the spring, and the Rubedo was like the Woodstock, where there was this incredible. And what's interesting about that is that the big conjunction of Uranus and Pluto was at a square from the opposite side, from the Virgo side, was squaring the nodes of Venus. It was squaring these places where Venus joins with the Sun and Gemini and like I said, we're at that same place where, the actual transits across the face of the Sun occurred in 2012 and 2004. Not going to see the transit this time, but we're in the same place. It's just the Venus is just below the actual disk of the Sun. Now let's think about this for a second. You'll often hear people say that Neptune is a higher octave of Venus, right? Venus, in terms of, the Greeks had many words for love, and in terms of Greek words, it would be eros, right? Erotic. It's very sensual, Venus. I remember Demetra George telling me one time, Venus doesn't care who's making love as long as the love is getting made. Which was said as a warning, by the way, kind of like, watch out for that, but Neptune would be more like agape. And then in the middle we have, there's eros, And then there's Philos, which is like familial, friendly, brotherly, sisterly, you know, just love for another human being as another, just as a person, right? Just caring about people and wanting the best for them, even if it's not, doesn't fit your own personal desires, right? So there's a very bit different. Erotic love is focused on the fulfillment of personal desire, and when two people want the same thing, that's really great, and it can be a wonderful experience. But when they want different things, how do you do that? Well, that's where surrendering your own erotic needs and wanting the best for that person, that's a different kind of love, you see. And then agape is like spiritual love. Agape is like, I would lay down my life for this person. You know, that's, I've often said to people, I wonder, I don't know, but I wonder if that isn't how you get Aries planets in your chart. You know, you're willing to make that ultimate sacrifice, and you come back with those as a gift. It's an interesting idea anyways. If so, man, I need to get off that train. I've been checking out too early, and maybe the fact that I made it to 52 this time around is proof that I'm finally getting the message. I don't know, but my point is that if Uranus and Pluto being square the nodes could result in this summer of love in 67 in this Woodstock event, what about Neptune squaring the nodes of Venus? Well, it's very interesting to me that recently you have this phenomenon of the so-called twin flames coming into the New Age community, and it's you know, you know, I'm not going to get too far into it because I don't want to give it any power. I think it's kind of a dangerous thing to get too invested in, because there's that inability to separate the erotic side of it from the agape and the philos side. I think for people in general, it's difficult, and yeah, a lot of people who are really embracing this concept of twin are suffering because of it. And I don't want to be, you know, adding to that. But as an observer, just observing that there is this thing out there that it's very interesting that we've had these alignments of Venus with the Sun in Gemini, the sign of the twins, and now we have this big twin flame phenomenon, and it's one wherein people feel that they're tied to another soul, but they can't. But there's this sacrifice that has to happen, and Neptune, agape, you know. So I feel like the reddening is probably going to be, in other words, while the alchemical process of Nigredo, Albedo, Rubedo, it's universal. The end product is not universal, right? Depending on every transformation is unique, and in this case, the red product of this is still going to be very spiritual. It may not be something you can hold in your hands for very long, because Neptune is like water, you know, you can't grasp it. and yet the vibration might be so high. It's like that event of Woodstock. I mean, people still talk about it 50 years later, you know. I was listening to the radio on my way up to see Venus the other night, and they had, you know, they 50 years ago, you know, 1970, Joni Mitchell released the song Woodstock, and I was just like, wow, you know, I wonder if we might not be able to capture some of that this summer somehow. And it may not be even a coming together in physical form, as I said, because Neptune is, but I wonder if there isn't some commonality to our experience, having gone through this blackening together, each with our own individual stories, and yet we all have a story about quarantine now, don't we? And in sharing those and in sharing that experience, if something higher isn't now available to us, and of course, here's the trick: you got to leave the blackening behind eventually, right? You got to say, you know what? Some states are going to relax their quarantine at different times than other states, and we can argue about that, call them idiots, or we could say, hey, their trip, I'm on this trip, and that's the only way you're going to get to the albedo, your own inner light, is by letting go of that kind of stuff, and then so so they I think it's important to understand that yes, this blackening, this de it's interesting. I had a dream last night that was incredibly Nigredo, and I don't know why, but I dream about Trump now and then. I dreamed uh, I dreamed way early on that I was an ancient shaman, like before civilization even. I was out in the forest and I was taking the energy of Trump and I was grounding it. I was pulling it down and I was doing this weird chant. And I could see the roots of the trees. I could see them. It was like I was in the roots and I was pulling that energy down, trying to ground it. I don't consciously think about the man all that much, to be honest with you. I try not to, because I try not to give that energy. Um, but last night I had a dream where I was I guess it was New York, but it was a very dense cityscape. And and we were going around to these various buildings, and Trump was, hitting this button or something, and the buildings were crumbling. And it was a very surreal experience to be on a building with another one crumbling next to you, and like, whoa, like, is that safe? And then and then there were these at some point, I can't remember if it was how it happened, but there were these bats, these big bats that were flying around, and bats can be a symbol of death, rebirth. um, and they one of them got on me and clung to me. It was like and it was like Velcro. I couldn't get it off, and it was like, oh man. I woke up and I was like really disturbed. I was like, oh. And it's just, but then I realized, like, it doesn't even matter. The subject matter of that dream is not necessarily important to pay attention to. She's like, whoa, dude, you're in the Nigredo, right? Like, very clearly, something is blackening inside you. And hey, that's a good thing, because that's where you're supposed to be. So oftentimes in that first stage, when I'm going through these things, when Shireen and I are doing these Project 40s together, and my role is as a guide to other people, I say, you might have dreams with, skulls and snakes and bats and, seemingly destructive energies, and that's really okay. It's part of the deal. It's part of the journey. Um, and of course, I had to remind myself of that. That's, yeah, it's cool, dude. Like, that's part of the trip. And so, yeah, if you're having, experiences of like that, protect yourself, certainly, and create this sacred container, but relax into that process, because that's how you get to the light. It's by going through the darkness that we get to the light, right? um so yeah, that's, I guess, that's about it for this time. I just wanted to share with you all the beauty and the harmony and the wonderful symmetry of Venus, and give you a heads up about this alignment with the moon that's going on the next 3 nights, because it's going to be part of a 3-part series of, and I think literally that's how we're going to get out of this Like by the time Venus has this morning sky alignment in July, we're actually going to be able to look back and say, yeah, wow, we're someplace different. And so, you know, a lot of people have been asking, when is this going to end? Well, maybe not soon, but and in some ways we might just be, even if the various authorities, you know, begin to relax restrictions right away, there's a part of us that's still dealing with this. There's a part of us that's still, that's just beginning to grasp what's happened. Yeah, we're still processing it. And that's what I'm talking about more in terms of our interior Venus function. So yeah, so it's really profound stuff, and I'm excited about it because, as I said, I really believe that on the other side of this, something beautiful is available, and I'm looking forward to that and seeing how it plays out. And you know, if there's a Woodstock too, man, I want to be there. But I'm not erotically attached to it, right? It doesn't have to be that. Whatever it is, like, I want it to be, I want what's best for it, for us. I want it to be its own version of that kind of beauty, and I'd love to be part of it, and I hope to see you there wherever it is. So that's it for this time. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, bright blessings of Venus, maximum brightness as evening star. Bye for now, y'all.